Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, Danielle of Written in the Star Wars, who's often on Star Wars content with us, but is also, there's a lot of other things Danielle likes to talk about, and one of them is House of the Dragon. We're a couple episodes into season 2. We're not going to do episode by episode coverage, but probably a couple of times through the course of the show, and then definitely at the end of it, we're going to bring on different guests to talk about it and how the show is going and what we think about it, and get a little past, again, the like kind of daily, episode by episode, what do we think of the exact episode, and talk more about some of the larger themes. So Danielle, why don't you just say hello and introduce yourself for those who haven't heard you before?
Hello, I'm Danielle. I'm mostly on TikTok at Written in the Star Wars. And like Matthew said, I usually talk about Star Wars, but I also am interested in lots of other things, including the Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire franchise, amongst others.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that. What are kind of your overall feelings on the worlds of George R. R. Martin?
Well, I first entered them when I was in college and undergrad. I think I was either freshman or sophomore, and I immediately fell in love with it. And it was via the show. I've read the first book. I've not read the other books. I always mean to, and I still do intend to. It's just that's a big undertaking. So
I was going to say, if you managed to read those books while in college, I was going to be very impressed that you found time for leisure reading. So
yeah.
That makes sense.
But I loved the show. I think when I started watching, it was right after the Red Wedding.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so I started watching it live with the season after that.
Mhm.
And I love fantasy, and it was such a really like interesting look at this fantastical world and lots of interesting characters. Didn't care for season 8 really. Aspects of it I did like, but ultimately it was a pretty big letdown for me.
I think a lot of people felt that way.
Yeah. So House of the Dragon, I was a little bit cautious with when I started with season 1, because I was just like, I don't know if I trust it. I still like I have trouble rewatching Game of Thrones itself because I still get so upset thinking about how it ended. But I was really pleased to see that, with season 1 of House of the Dragon, I thought they took a really they really wanted to kind of cleanse, I think, what the fans had been left with season 8, and got this chance to go back and start something new. That still leads to the same thing ultimately, but is still something that we can separate enough from. And so I've really enjoyed it so far. I'm looking forward to the rest of the season.
That makes sense. And so you have not read the book that this is based off of, right?
No, I own it. Again, intend to, but I just haven't. Something I found with, so I started reading the first Song of Ice and Fire book after I watched like the first 3 seasons, I think, of Game of Thrones. And I was still quite confused. So many names, so many whatever. But I did find that, or I guess I started reading the book before, and then I was confused by everything. I had a lot of trouble holding on to names, holding on to events. And then I watched the show, what there was of the show, and went back to the first book. And everything made so much more sense to me because there were characters I could put faces to, or like kind of have a stronger connection to, I guess, ability to remember them. And it was then that I was like, okay, I actually want to watch the entirety of the show before reading the books, because I think I need that that familiarity with the characters that you can get via like visuals. Before I go into actually reading it. And so I think that's kind of what I'm doing with House of the Dragon. I'll probably read the whole thing once this season's done, maybe. I don't know.
Makes sense. Well, first of all, it's going to be a lot easier to read because it's maybe 50 to 100 pages out of a larger book instead of it being, a multi-book series over thousands and thousands of pages. Also, I think one huge advantage that the show has is the story's done. They're filling in far more detail, obviously. But George R. R. Martin has written the beginning, the middle, and the end of the season of the story. Whereas because of his delays and, production schedules and the show, as we all know, passed the books. And I think that was part of the problem, is they didn't really know what to do in those later seasons. So what was your kind of take on, obviously you really liked season 1. what were some of the kind of the major themes that you saw that you really liked how they were exploring?
Well, Rhaenyra and Alicent, I really, really enjoy. I know some people don't like how Alicent's character is in the show because in the book, I guess she's portrayed as much more vindictive on her own right, much more vicious in her own right. But as someone who's not read it that way and who's just coming at it from the show, her character makes sense to me as being someone who her entire life has been forced upon her essentially, and she takes what she can get where she can get it for herself, and that makes sense to me. Same with Rhaenyra, but I really like their friendship and that the rivalry is mainly between them, even though it should be between Rhaenyra and Aegon, because they're the two battling for the throne, but it's between Rhaenyra and Alicent. And I really loved how season 1 showed those, used them as the through line for that. How their relationship changed is a cue to how they're changing as people. And I thought that was a smart way to do it. And something that would have never happened in, I think, a Game of Thrones TV show.
Right.
But yeah, so I appreciate that. I think
let me just start there in his response, because one thing I think that really helps with this, the book is very different from the Game of Thrones books in that the book is meant to be something that literally exists in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. It is written,
like
I think, it's a book I think that Tyrion references at one point. Certainly he references the author. And the author is often very clear about, here are the sources I'm using. And I don't think it really clicked for me until this most recent episode of House of the Dragon called Rhaenyra the Cruel. Because one thing it really showed is how we can see the actual character of Rhaenyra, and then see how, this terrible thing happens. Everyone ascribes it to Rhaenyra. The High Towers are very good at then propagandizing it. And so everyone remembers her being very vicious. And I was watching that, and then it didn't really click until you said that, and thinking, oh, that also is how you square the circle of the difference between Alicent in the book versus Alicent in the show. Because all the stuff that we're seeing in the show isn't what the history books are going to record. They're just going to record the things that Alicent is said to have done and that is linked to and stuff like that. So, yeah, like I think I've never really gotten that until now, but I think that's how you kind of reconcile that. This show is saying, here's the real story, and it's helpful because the books will tell you what is remembered and how different that is, and that's the role of women being so misremembered, I think, is another one of the themes.
That is really interesting. I hadn't thought about it. Like, I knew the book was a history book, and therefore many of the things are kind of left up to interpretation of, like, did it actually happen? Did it not? But I hadn't made that connection of maybe that's why Rhaenyra and Alicent aren't as vicious in the show as they are portrayed in the book. That was a really good catch. I think with season 1, and I'll be interested to see how I feel with season 2 when we get the full thing. But with season 1, my main criticism was that I felt like it happened so fast. And I attribute that, I mean, I blame it on Game of Thrones season 8 because I feel like, I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like maybe HBO and maybe the creators were a little worried about how reception would be. And they wanted to tell as complete of a story maybe as they could in season 1, or get as far as they could in season 1, just in case reception wasn't good, in case they were still getting some of those residuals from Game of Thrones season 8. Because I would have loved to spend so much more time with young Rhaenyra and Alicent. And really get to dive into their relationship and into kind of the politics going on at the time as well with Viserys and everything. I felt like it went so fast. There were so many beats that I wanted to sit with a little bit longer. And like I said, I'll be interested to see how that is with season 2, because it doesn't feel like there's a need to fast forward through so many things anymore. They've already got a guaranteed season 3. So we'll see. Yeah,
I think that's really true. The fact that they did the age skip, including, changing the actors, halfway through season 1 felt really strange to me because you could have done, that entire thing in season 1. If nothing else, showing how Rhaenyra and Harlan Strong become together. I mean, there is the shoulder push that launched 1,000 fanfics of when he just, is like, all right, I'm going to go rescue her. And a lot of people took very thirstily to that moment. I think with very good reason. But we never actually see their courtship in any way or like how that all develops. And I feel like her decisions to have children who are quite obviously not those of her father and still like it, I want to learn more about that moment. My feeling is that you're probably right. It's something to do with season 8. I also think that, and this is the struggle I think we're often talking about because I get guests who want to talk about the themes and the characters and the plots. And I think a lot of how they marketed it was, we're going to give you dragons fighting and we're going to give you the awesome army battles.
Yeah.
And so I think it was probably partly wanting to rush the story in general, but also like they wanted to get to the actual war by season 2.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because I remember that was a big part of how they marketed. But it's I would have loved to see more of that for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of people got very into the like, and I know HBO again was pushing this, like, are you team black or team green? Do you think of yourself as solidly on one side or the other, or what are your thoughts on that whole discourse?
I am very much team black, but with the caveat of I do think that picking a team is kind of missing the point of the show. Like picking a team so stringently that you don't sympathize or empathize with the other team is missing the point of the show. Because I'm a Rhaenyra girly, also Daemon girly. I know he's my one complicated, problematic fave.
I'm going to question the word one, but go on.
But I also have a lot of sympathy for Alicent, and I have a lot of sympathy for Helena. I find myself at times having sympathy for Aegon and Aemond, and so never Kristen Cole. But and so I'm team black in that my allegiance is with Rhaenyra, but I don't absolutely hate everyone on the greens.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I think they've done a really good job of showing the cycle of problems and how it got worse and worse, and that a lot of it ties back to the men kind of manipulating pawn. I mean, it was funny as you're talking about like the people on Team Green you have sympathy for. The fact that Otto Hightower, I was like agreeing with him in this most recent episode, made me so angry. I was like, no, but he was so right. And like, to me, one of the things that drove me the most crazy about season 1 is that they really set it up as it is Otto whispering in Alicent's ear and convincing her that she will not be safe if Rhaenyra is queen. Because like in theory, it should have been everything is fine. Like her sons still get to be princes of the realms. They get to be important. They're not going to be king, but I don't think Alicent ever wanted her sons to be king. And Viserys is going to be happy and everything's okay. But then when, and granted, I think Otto is not, this scene again, like I think Otto clearly is incredibly power hungry and very motivated.
Yeah.
But I think part of what we're again seeing is that his argument of Rhaenyra will never be accepted because the country is not ready for a female ruler, that there's unfortunate truth to that, and that it doesn't make him right. And so you take that and then you also see this whole cycle of like, when young Aemond goes and gets his dragon and trains Vhagar, I'm totally rooting for him.
Yeah.
And then when like people just start attacking him, I'm like, no, leave the kid alone. And then he starts like calling them bastards and pulling out the stone, and I'm like, oh, well, I guess. But then like, Jaehaerys pulls out the knife, and I'm like, oh no, put that away, don't. Oh God, like, yeah, like
they're just kids.
Yeah,
they shouldn't have been feeling that animosity towards each other anyway. And the only reason they do is because of the adults in their lives who have created that atmosphere around them. And I do blame Otto for a lot of it because a lot of what Allison has to, like, she's in the position she's in now because of Otto's whispering, because of him wanting to get a high tower into this position of power. The reason she's with Viserys is because Otto forced her to flirt with him and offer him comfort and offer herself to him so that he couldn't refuse. Right. And the reason that she's at odds with Rhaenyra now is because of Otto's whispering and, like you said, telling her she wouldn't be safe. And I think it's incredibly telling and so true that she is in this position because of Otto, and he now gets to step away from that. And she doesn't. She's stuck there. And he gets to leave. Well, I mean, he might not view it as gets, but he does. He has put this essentially child king who doesn't know how to deal with his temper and doesn't know how to rule a kingdom on the throne. Yeah. And he no longer has to deal with the ramifications of that. Yeah. But Alicent does. And so that's where, like, my sympathy with her lies. There, like, don't get me wrong, there are moments where I do not sympathize with her at all. One of those being in season 1 when she forced Rhaenyra to go to the small council meeting.
Oh yeah, that's horrible.
Right after childbirth. Absolutely horrible. And that was a moment I was like, nah. Yes, my allegiance is strongly with Rhaenyra. Yeah. But I will feel sorry for you sometimes, Alicent.
Well, especially because, like, one of the moments I rewatched season 1 for the last couple of days to get ready for this, and then obviously the episodes in season 2. One of the moments that most breaks my heart, because I want to so be on Rhaenyra's side, and Rhaenyra is so aware of the fact that as a woman she is being manipulated and pulled by all these other people. And yet when Alicent is put in the situation where, without any instigation by her, she winds up married to Viserys, Rhaenyra's father, Rhaenyra blames her. Yeah. And clearly, like, you just want her to be like, girl, can't you see that, like, she's just as much a victim of all of this as you are? But also you understand, of course she can't, because what she sees is her best friend seemingly betraying her, and, like, just marrying your dad, which is, like, all kinds of, like, weird and creepy, but also just, like, now possibly supplanting her own attack to the throne, to her own claim to the throne.
Yeah. And again, they were kids then too.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have had to deal with those situations. And it was, again, the adults in their lives who were forcing them to.
Yeah.
And so just a bit, like you said, a vicious circle.
Just one more of the adults that I want to call out specifically in that, because I think Otto is the most obvious. Daemon is definitely part of it. But Lord Corlys, I think, is also a part of it in ways we don't necessarily see. He's the sea snake. Because we never see him tell Baela, Vhagar is yours, your mother died, that dragon is now yours. But as you said, clearly some adult told it to her, and I think it would probably be him, or, like, others that he had told that to. When Baela is ready to beat up this other kid because he, claimed a dragon, clearly some adults have been whispering that. And we know Lord Corlys has all that same ambition and all that same kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about Lord Corlys. I do think it's interesting from what I've seen. Like, I don't mind being kind of, like, spoiled for what is in the books of it. And so I know that a certain 2 characters we've been introduced to have ties to Lord Corlys. And I'm interested to see how that plays into his character, because I don't know how much we can talk about that. I won't say anything, but I'll just, do you know what I'm talking about?
So I was going to say, one of the other differences we're getting is because this is, like, it's more like The Hobbit than Lord of the Rings. It's a short part of a story. So many of the details they're filling in and making up, but also I don't honestly know exactly what you're referring to. I haven't read the book in probably a year and a half. So
okay. So, yeah, I'll leave it then. But but it promises a further dive into his character and into the more maybe, like, secretive aspects of his character than we've seen so far. So I am looking forward to that.
I think so. Well, let's then get into season 2, and let's start with the character of Alicent, because obviously we've seen her make a number of big changes. The first regarding Mr. Sir Criston Cole, who I think we both have very negative feelings on. The most white knighty who feels like he's been friend zoned in the most friend zoney way, saying all those terms in the most negative way. But part of what I always got the sense of in season 1 is that part of what bothered her so much about Rhaenyra is that she feels like, and she actually says this, she has to uphold all these rules, and Rhaenyra gets to break them, in her mind, seemingly without consequence. And now Alicent is leaping aboard the coal train, with no references to the musician, as I said. That I'll avoid that term in the future. What did you think of that development with her, and also her development in general?
That was interesting. I saw an interview, or that kind of referenced that maybe when Daemon and Rhaenyra get together in season 1 for the first time on the beach, the dark beach scene where you can't see anything, that same night is maybe when Alicent and Criston Cole first got together.
Yeah.
And so that would be the night that I think, is it the night that Aemon loses his eye? I think.
Oh, interesting. You think it goes all the way back to then?
Yeah, or maybe slightly later. I'm not sure, but I think it is supposed to be like the same night that Rhaenyra and Daemon first sleep together. Is the night, like, Rhaenyra's like, well, where was Alicent? And they're like, Alicent was sleeping with Criston Cole too. So they were both like doing like their own things, not really following like where their priority should have been or whatever. And so I think it's interesting that it is her kind of like taking back control a little bit, but also did she know about Criston and Rhaenyra?
Yes, he directly confesses. Like she's trying to get him to tell her about Rhaenyra and Daemon, and then he directly confesses to her.
Okay. So yeah. So I can also see it as her, like, maybe, I don't know, like a connection to Rhaenyra still in either a negative or positive way, and that this is a man that they've shared. And I think it's interesting for her character, and also just like a little disappointing, like, Alicent, you could do so much better than Criston Cole. But she doesn't view that for herself. I think, like, when she tells Otto in episode 2, I've sinned, and she keeps trying to tell people about it, and she can't get it out, or people just don't want to hear it. It's like almost maybe it is a form of punishment for herself as well. She gets something out of it, both positive and negative, and that's maybe what keeps her a little grounded. I don't know.
I mean, well, first of all, in terms of her options, it's Cole or Mr. Feet Picks. So,
that's
like,
true.
I do think Cole is probably a little better than him. But I saw it very differently. I think that she gets together with Cole, that like the first time when we see him going down on her is the first time they've gotten together, because I feel like she is willing to break some of the rules. And I'll talk. Well, there's two parts of it for me. One part is that I think she's gotten to that point where, like, like the kid in the class who always follows the rules and is disappointed that the teacher never comes down onto the others who do. And so eventually, like, they break bad. They're like, well, screw it. I'm going to go do all these bad things too, because why shouldn't I be able to get away with it? And I feel like in some ways it's the realization that there's always been this plot to seize the throne. Because for her, she doesn't ever want to actually go through with disinheriting Rhaenyra and starting this possible war until, in her mind, the king says, I want Aegon to be king.
Yeah.
Not realizing that he's talking about the Song of Ice and Fire, because maybe he should have told some other people about it beforehand. Well, let's blame him a little bit. But I remember her being really shocked when she realizes, no, all these people have always had a plan for this.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's a big part of it. And the other thing is, I feel like she's so dedicated to following those rules. I don't know if she could have brought herself to do that while Viserys was still alive.
Yeah.
Like, and that is after he dies. But you're right. It's interesting because we don't know, for example, we don't know that's the first time.
Well, so I think it would. No. Sorry, I'm getting my timelines confused. I would need to go back and rewatch season 1 to know when it was. But I think like whatever I'm referencing isn't necessarily like what I think. It's that I think it's been hinted at. Like that was originally like they filmed the scene like that, but then they didn't put it in season 1. But I get what you're saying, and that would make sense.
Yeah. I will say it's one of those things that in the books, like he mentions that there are all these different theories. And that some of them, like he mentions that kind of because of the nature of war, people have had terrible theories about the sexual infidelity of both of these princesses. And but beyond that, I don't think he ever goes into any detail about her and Cole.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I do like the irony of Kristen telling Rhaenyra, "So you want me to be your whore?" And then he just ends up being a whore anyway. Like, I'll do anything to make fun of Kristen Cole. Fabian Frankel, though, who plays him, excellent actor to make so many, like, let's talk about like truly like just giving your all to a character to make people absolutely despise him.
Well, and it's funny because it's not that I want to see the same themes everywhere, but I think, you and I often talk about Star Wars, and one of the things we talk about is like the danger of being very rigidly following rules. And that I think there's kind of a similar theme here of, what is it like when you first start to think, well, maybe I could break those rules too, and I kind of wonder. You have to do things the right way. And that's why he feels, and again, it's in really stupid and sexist ways, why he feels like he and Rhaenyra should run off. But I think it's part of why he's so angry at Harlan Strong, is because, like, flaunting this breaking of the rules and all this nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah. And why he's so, and I do understand, like, as much as I don't agree with it, if I put myself in his mind and the way that he thinks, why he's so angry at Rhaenyra, because she was the first one who he, like sullied himself for, essentially. Alicent isn't the first one. So, like, it's kind of like, you start down a path and you're like, well, how much worse can it get? Already started. Might as well keep going.
For sure. I like the idea for Rhaenyra's the gateway drug. Which gateway drugs is a myth that there's not actually any truth to that, but you know what I mean. Let's talk about Rhaenyra then. What do you think of her? Rhaenyra the Wicked or the Cruel or whatever.
I know.
It
is so interesting to see how it is all being kind of like used as propaganda and everything. I saw people say that Otto in episode 2 is like Kris Jenner, like Kim Kardashian's mom, momager, who is like, this is an awful thing that happened. Now, how can we use this to our advantage? And I just thought that, like, it's one of my favorite things to see it was one of my favorite things in Game of Thrones, as much as it like frustrated me, was to see how the politics could be used to turn this thing into something it wasn't.
Sorry, I got cut off on that. Can you start that whole thing again?
Oh yeah. So I saw people compare Otto Hightower this episode to Kris Jenner. So Kim Kardashian's like momager, who will take a really awful thing that happened and be like, how can we use this to our advantage? And one of my favorite things to watch in Game of Thrones was how the politics could be used to turn these events and to turn the people's attention towards like what they wanted it to be, and change the narrative, essentially, and or direct the narrative, I guess. And I really liked seeing that in this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This my power keeps cutting out, so I'm gonna I think we're okay. If it happens one more time, I'm gonna have to just call the podcast a little early. I know that if you are on TikTok, you may have seen that a dam has broken in southern Minnesota. I'm far away from that. I'm not in any danger, but I know it's directly affecting the power lines because it was a major power source. It may have nothing to do with it. I don't know, but somehow like my system, the internet keeps going in and out. So let's try and finish this, and then if not, I may have to call it early.
Yeah, that's fine.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, that is something I love, and I love watching how they do that. And I really love the contrast between Aegon and Hightower, Otto Hightower, because as evil as Otto is and self-interested, he's obviously brilliant, in the way he understands why the Ratcatcher thing is a disaster. And I think Aegon is one of the characters who I'm most kind of. We were going to start talking about Rhaenyra, but I want to talk about Aegon for a second, and then we'll go back to Rhaenyra for sure. That first episode this season, where people are coming to him, and he's like, "Oh, well, that sucks. I'm the king. I want to give you all your sheep back. I want to do all these things for you." I think it would have been very easy to make him Joffrey 2.0, or the early beta version of Joffrey. And he's so clearly not that.
Yeah.
He's awful. I mean, he sexually assaults people. He conscribes his own children, his bastard children, to die in these horrible fighting pits where children are killing each other. Like, he's not a good person at all. But he's not maliciously cruel in the way Joffrey is. Like, It feels like he just doesn't care, like, that these people are going to be harmed, but there isn't any sense of like, how dare you ask me for more sheep? I'm going to have you fight to the death, or that kind of stuff. And it's like, it's not that I think he's better or worse than Joffrey, but he's just different in a way that I really appreciate.
I think he actually wants to be a good ruler. He just doesn't know how to.
Yeah.
I think that you're right. It could have been really easy for him to be Joffrey 2.0, but I'm glad they went a different direction with it. And also kind of leads me to like, I love that kind of nuance in a character who is not a good person, but has good moments, or like, they're understandable in some aspects. I hate that Daemon doesn't get that same opportunity as much. If that makes sense.
I feel like video and seeing if that helps.
I think it could also be my internet.
Are you still there?
Yes.
All right. Can you try turning off your camera?
Yes.
All right. Let's see if that's better. I think Daemon does get a little bit of those moments in the love he has for his brother, and that he does clearly have a lot of love for his niece/wife, which is all the kinds of problematic, but different time, weirdos, whatever. Still very problematic. But you're right. I would have liked to get a lot more of that with Daemon. And with Aegon, at least, I have a lot of sympathy for Alicent, and so I don't blame her for this necessarily. I don't think she's Mother of the Year when it comes to Aegon. Like, she is constantly giving him negative reinforcement. Granted, he's being a dick, but like, she's kind of telling him you're a dick and that's how you're going to act. And so he does wind up acting like that. Like, it's a pretty clear sign of like, when kids act out, just punishing them and telling them they're terrible doesn't actually work in terms of making them any better.
I think that Alicent maybe views her children as like, they were never things that like, she never wanted them. They were things she was required to do. And so I think that is where her struggles with being like a good mom comes from, because like, I think she looks at them and is like, this is the life that was forced on me, not the life that I really wanted. And I think she knows she's not a good mother. I think that's why she left Aegon when he was crying and at the end of episode 2, because I think she maybe acknowledged to herself she doesn't know how to treat him as anything other than a king.
Yeah.
And that's not what he needed then, but she's not able to give that.
Yeah.
So I think in a way, I think maybe that was her being a good parent. It was like acknowledging that she couldn't, like, he needed comfort and she just doesn't find it in herself to be able to give it to him, maybe.
Well, certainly I think they did such an interesting job of, she has, I think, a very nuanced relationship with the king. because I think with Viserys, because you're right, it is forced on her, and she hates that, and she resents that, and clearly the sexual life between them is quite awful. We get that one scene in season 1 where she's woken up in the middle of the night, and like it's paired very well against Rhaenyra talking about how much people can enjoy sex, including women, and she's just laying there clearly not interested and not enjoying it while he's on top of her, while Viserys is on top of her.
Yeah.
But also she clearly loved the king. I mean, like she's the only one who cries at Viserys' death within his court, at least, other than Rhaenyra and Daemon to some extent. She feels real legitimate grief.
I think that there was, as awful as it is, when she was forced to, comfort Viserys when she was younger, I think that there was a real like friendship between them.
Yeah.
An understanding maybe between them that is really awful that it had to be used in the way that it did for her. Because I don't know, I think she grew to have an understanding with him, and maybe that is what led to, like, even if she hated being with him and she hated that she was forced to live this life, that he did maybe understand a part of her that others didn't. And he was what she had left when Rhaenyra not necessarily abandoned her, but no longer wanted to, have the same friendship that they used to have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the kind of like she wanted to stay friends with Rhaenyra, but Rhaenyra didn't want that, which is also understandable.
Yeah.
And I think one thing they established in other stories from the original movies, this is more in the books than in the movies, but like the friendship between royal children and the children of the helpers of those royal people, as good as the royal person's going to be, it's very easy for the other child to feel very much in their shadow. Yeah. The one that most comes to mind for me is Sansa Stark and Jane Poole, which again has gone into much more detail in the books. But yeah, it would make sense to me that Alicent would feel all that. Right, well, let's get back to Rhaenyra though, because she does deserve some more conversation. Yeah, I'm really interested in seeing her because, well, let me actually just go back to it. What is your take on her sort of being so insistent on denying the rumors that it seems to so much of the rest of the court and the world, it's very hard to deny about the parentage of her children?
I think that she's very cognizant of how tenuous her claim to the throne is at that point, how it has been since Alicent gave birth to Aegon, and that any insinuation that her children are bastards, or that even if they don't have like some, Targaryen, aren't primarily Targaryen, would be another excuse for people to say that she can't have the throne, because if her children are bastards, then she doesn't have an heir.
Right.
And if she doesn't have an heir, then they're just going to have this conversation again when she dies. And wouldn't it be better to have a line that is secure? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think that it definitely, I think it probably primarily comes from that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's also just a little bit of pride maybe too.
Yeah. I wonder how much Daemon has an influence on it, because Daemon constantly flouts the rules and gets away with it.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells her directly, like, you're going to be the queen. You get to do what you want. Mm-hmm. And I could see, like, because it feels like there's kind of a recklessness to it that feels very Daemon in that regard.
Well, and what did Aegon get to do with all of his bastards? Like, you know what I mean? Like, get to do?
Yeah.
What did he do with them? But it was never a question. It was never like, the men don't have to answer to why they have these bastard children.
Right.
But the women do, because they have to bear them and they have to give birth to them. They can't just send them off somewhere.
Right.
And go ahead.
Especially because again, here's the line that history doesn't remember. It's not that Rhaenyra's like, screw my husband, I want to cheat on him with this other guy.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to have children with her husband, but her husband isn't interested in women.
Yeah.
And like, again, that character, I think his name's Laenor Valerian.
Mm-hmm.
He could have been such a dick about the whole thing, and he's not. He's like,
No.
I want you to have pleasure with other people, and I want us to have children. And he acts as a father to those kids in a loving way, and isn't resentful of Harlan. And a little bit at times in ways that I think are understandable, but like, this isn't Rhaenyra's choice. She has to have children, and the husband who other people told her she has to have is unable to give them to her.
Yeah.
So like, I think there's a recklessness to it, but there also is a sense of, I think for her, very rightly so, like, what else was I supposed to do in this situation?
Yeah. Yeah. It goes into like what I said earlier, like she has to have an heir.
Yeah.
And like there's just no two ways about it. And if she doesn't, like, she has to get them somehow, so might as well have them with someone who she also happens to care about and who cares about her. But yeah, I always think back to that birth scene, which is the first time we see Emma Darcy as Rhaenyra. And it's such a like, I want to say like beautifully shot, but it is a really like viscerally shot scene. And I also like just talking about Laenor too, like the fact that he's there and he wants to be there, and he's concerned about her, and he's like sticking up for her too whenever Alicent forces her to go to the meeting, and he's like, kind of is like, fuck her, like, don't go. And so I love that relationship that Rhaenyra built with him, because she could have also very easily been angry at him and upset at him for that, but she wasn't. She saw a way that they could both get what they wanted.
She could have publicly denounced him. I mean, this is not a world where, men loving men is something that it is allowed, like, behind the curtains.
Yeah.
But if she'd publicly said, my husband won't do his husbandly duties, she could have gotten a new husband and probably had him killed. And she absolutely doesn't want to do that. So
no.
Yeah. And so what do you think of where she's going this season?
I think it's interesting. It wasn't what I expected, because obviously the end of season 1, when she finds out about Lucerys and how Vhagar ate him and his dragon. God, that scene. Sorry.
Oh, so
I
horrific.
laugh and am horrified at it. Like, I laugh because I'm horrified at it. But when she finds out about it, and she's so angry, like, you feel the wrath of the desire for vengeance from her. And Emma Darcy doesn't even say a word. And so I think I expected, like, right off the bat for her to be like full throttle, they're going to pay for what they've done. And she wasn't. And in many ways, I preferred that, because I liked the scene with Rhaenys and Daemon, where Rhaenys says, I learned of my daughter's death from a raven, and I couldn't accept it until I saw her body. And how she says, Rhaenyra learned of her son's death by a raven. She needs some kind of closure. And I think that fits in with Rhaenyra's character more, like, the more I think about it, because of how much she cares about her children.
Yeah.
And how important her relationship to them was to her, that she may have had, like, been, and she may be incredibly angry, but first and foremost, she needs to be a mother.
Yeah.
And she needs to have that closure before she decides what to do. And I think it's actually an incredibly, like, strong thing for her to do, to recognize that and not just jump immediately into, like, blind vengeance, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and maybe I'm reading too much into this here, but I think there's a really interesting lesson in that, in through kind of a bad reason, but it gets to a good place, in that Rhaenyra has that white hot anger, and probably in that moment she wants to kill all of the Greens, but also because she's a woman, no one listens to her. Like, she's in childbirth, she's doing all these other things. Alicent sees her son lose an eye, and frankly, if a parent sees that horribly traumatic thing happen, and they start yelling and screaming about taking an eye from someone else, I certainly don't think anyone should listen to them.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna be like, you have just had this horrifically tragic thing happen to your child. I'm not going to judge you by what you do at the worst moment you've ever experienced in your life.
Yeah.
And again, though, because Alicent is the queen, no one listens to her. Yeah. And later she's like, oh my God, how could I have ever wanted that? But if it had been Viserys who said, my son lost an eye, the offender should lose an eye, there's no question. It happens right in that moment, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I also think it's interesting that, like, I didn't believe Alicent's anger in that moment as on behalf of her son. I believed it in, this is yet another way Rhaenyra's people have undermined me.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks a lot to, like, the different ways that their parents, her and Rhaenyra, is that Rhaenyra's sadness was for herself because of what happened to her son, and because of that loss and that fear as a mother, whereas I don't think that Alicent stemmed from that same place.
Yeah, I think it's as much about Rhaenyra's getting away with it again.
Yeah.
You know, because it's also, I have to sleep with this horrible man. Rhaenyra gets to sleep with this, you know, sexual god of a man, and her kids who aren't supposed to be there get to damage my kids, and there's no, you know, retribution. It's like, I always think that's a very interesting story of the person who, like, has always been, you know, it's the fallen paladin, really. It's the person who thinks, if I follow all the rules, God will love me and God will do good things for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, like, is true. There isn't that kind of divine justice in the world. Thank God. Because I think it would make the world a horrible place. And I'd have to think that all the bad things that happen to me, I deserve, which I, you know, really don't want to think. But yeah, I think that's what makes Alicent's story so interesting, where it's going. And you're right. It's Rhaenyra has I think because Rhaenyra has a really loving relationship in the creation of her children, that it gives her a very different relationship to her children.
And I think that Rhaenyra has always had people who prioritized her or who loved her unquestioningly. Her father loved her that way. Her mother loved her that way. What's his name? The father of her children loved her that way. Yeah. And even her friends, like, I think Laenor loved her that way too. A different type of love, certainly, but I think he did. He certainly cared for her. And I don't think Alicent has ever had that. Her father, who she loved more than anything, always just used her.
Yeah.
And Viserys maybe loved her in his own way, but not the depths of which he loved Rhaenyra.
Yeah.
And her children don't even love her that way. And so I think and this is, again, like, the sympathy that I have for Alicent stems from, you know, here's not just Rhaenyra getting away with it again, but here's proof that people love Rhaenyra and they'll never love me that way.
Yeah.
And I think that is, and Rhaenyra used to love her that way. I think that is also, like, the crux of it, is her person who did was Rhaenyra, and Rhaenyra took that from her too. So.
Yeah. No, that'll make a lot of sense. Well, this has been a great conversation. I definitely want to get you back, like, when we finish the show or later in the show. Yeah. Any last things you want to say?
Kristen Cole, your time will come.
Yeah. I'm sure he's getting some epic death. I think my last thing is the idea of twins having to fight each other because they're on different sides of this debate is a very, like, you hear that one line and like, wow, you can make a great story out of it.
Yeah.
I don't think they really did. Like, that whole thing fell a little, and even in the books, it's kind of just mentioned, you're like, oh, there could be an epic story behind it. Again, I think because it felt so rushed, I think we'd really gotten more time with those two characters and enough to understand why one of them makes the choice that he does and the other makes the choice that he does. It would have hit a lot harder, but it definitely felt like that I think that's been the only really low point for me, is that felt like a box they had to check instead of a story they really told.
No, that makes sense, because I was thinking about it and I was like, with season 2, because I didn't rewatch season 1 before starting season 2. I was kind of like, oh yeah, I forgot about these characters. I was like, and when the what's her name? Was it the white worm or the gray worm?
Yeah.
White worm. When she was like, the last I saw you, there were 2 of you. I was like, what? What is she talking about? And then I remembered, oh yeah, they were twins. And so yeah, I forgot about it. I feel like it would have had more power if it was like at the end of season 1, when I was still like really remembering what had happened, or if they had added, like you said, something else before that fight that set up and reminded us of like what their relationship used to be and how upsetting this would be for them and everything like that. But they didn't really. And I think it was also hard and I know they did all this on purpose, but it was really hard to tell which was which. And I still was like, wasn't completely sure. And again, I know that was on purpose, but it made the ending a little less like emotional for me, I think.
Like I couldn't really tell who won at the end
until he said your grace, and then I was like, oh, that's Eric, not Eric.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, this has been wonderful. Danielle, tell people how they can find you if they want to hear more of your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok, written in the Star Wars, and I write reviews for mostly Star Wars, but also other media on Temple of Geek.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely check out Danielle's stuff. I'm constantly giving new perspectives on things that I really love. Her TikToks are both really entertaining and really thoughtful, especially if you want to know more about the clones. And of course, follow this podcast, I hope. Like, subscribe. Please think about becoming a member for only $5 a month. You get bonus content, you get bonus episodes, you don't get ads, and mostly you get to help support everything we're doing here. And of course, please send in feedback. We want to know what you think. What do you think of the show so far? All the feedback information is on our show notes and on our website, theethicalpanda.com. That's also where you find how to become a member. On behalf of myself and Danielle, thank you so much. Members, stick around for bonus content. We're going to talk about the Hunger Games. We have spoken. All right. So, Danielle, you are also a great devotee of the Hunger Games with a lot of great thoughts about them, the movies and the books. And people can definitely find some more older episodes about those on here. Why are we still getting more? Like, we've had Song of Snakes and Songbirds, which I think a lot of people were kind of nervous about, turned out really great. And now we have yet another book and movie coming out almost at the same time. What's going on in this world?
So the book and the movie is called Sunrise on the Reaping, and it takes place during the second quarter quell, which is, for as Hunger Games fans will know, Hamish Abernathy's games. And
Hamish being the mentor of Katniss and Peeta throughout the movies.
Yes. And this is a story that I think a lot of fans have wanted for a long time, but Suzanne Collins, being smart, never writes something for this franchise, for her series, that she doesn't want to, or that she doesn't feel like she has something to say. And I think it's really telling that now she's decided that she has something to say, given, the absolute atrocities that are happening across the world, specifically the past year. And there's not a lot that we know about the book yet. So we only know when it takes place. We don't know what the POV is going to be, or whose POV, point of view, it's going to be from. So as much as people want it to be from Hamish's POV, we don't know if that's going to be the case yet. They haven't said. But we do know that Suzanne Collins said that she was really inspired by looking at propaganda and how propaganda from governments and ruling authorities can kind of infect people, and how it can make them voluntarily complicit. And I think that is very timely, a very timely topic to explore. And she's going to use philosophy in this, just as she does in all of the Hunger Games books, but especially the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what her take is on it. I don't want to say like one way or the other that I think it's absolutely not going to be from Hamish's point of view, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not.
Yeah.
And I hope that people are open to that possibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I have such mixed feelings on it because all the stuff about propaganda I think is so interesting. The stuff about philosophy, especially about like pre-enlightenment and enlightened philosophy about the social contract. Danielle did a fantastic TikTok about this, but if anybody in their, world history class or intro to philosophy or anything, you probably read Locke and Hobbes and how they have these two very different views of the role the government should play. And a lot of it has to do with how much do you trust the people and thus want government not to limit them versus how much do you distrust the people and want government to control them. And that's kind of Locke and Hobbes, with then Rousseau having a kind of third position that comes into the debate that has a lot to do with, humanity in its natural state, which has a lot of interesting sides to it and also is very racist and classist and the whole like noble savage idea. And again, this is things that Danielle explains so well in her TikTok there. And so I love all of that. On the flip side, I tend to be very nervous about prequels in general because I always feel like they're adding details to the story that didn't get mentioned at a later point. Like, or they're taking a character on a journey that may not match with where we think he is now. I'm gonna give it as an example, and I know not everyone agrees, and that's fine. One of my favorite science fiction heist movies is a movie called Solo. And if I think about it in those terms, I love the movie. And if I think about it as in any way related to Star Wars and Han Solo, I hate the movie. Because to me, it doesn't fit Han Solo as I understand him. Other people disagree, and that's totally fine. But, every time there's a prequel, there's questions about, like, does this fit? Does this not? And I admit that Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes completely blew me away because of how well it did all of that. And with Haymitch, I think is one of the few characters who can have a prequel because he's been so secretive about his past. And all we really know is that he was very traumatized by it. Mm-hmm. We know that he wins the games and we know how he wins the games. But other than that, we know so few details. So there's a part of me that wishes we would get out of District 12 for a while and would just give us like the story of someone from a completely different time who we haven't heard about before. But if we're going to get someone who we know, I think Haymitch is in many ways one of the best choices to get.
Yeah. And that's assuming that it is from his POV.
Right.
I personally think it's really interesting that they haven't said anything yet about, they don't even say during Haymitch Abernathy's games. They say during the second Court of Quell.
Right.
And so I don't know, like, I mean, I could very well be wrong and it will be Haymitch's point of view. I personally don't see, and Suzanne Collins, I will raise my hands up and say, knows better than I. This is, I mean, I trust her. I trust her with any of these stories. But right now, I don't see how exploring a theme of propaganda fits into Haymitch's POV.
Yeah.
Unless it is maybe him, buying into like, capital propaganda when he's there.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that's something that was kind of teased already in the Hunger Games books.
Yeah.
With, Katniss getting to see how other people lived, and she never really bought into it, but it was that exploration of her having to balance what she grew up with, not having in District 12 and what these people have in opulence in the capital. And Suzanne Collins isn't one to repeat a story. And
that's very true.
And so that's why I could very easily see it being from the perspective of maybe one of the like District 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 tributes, because they're trained. They have training centers in these districts. It is a great honor to be picked for the games.
Yeah.
They have aligned themselves essentially with the capital so that they get the most out of the viciousness of the capital. And that's something we already are seeing explored in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes with what Sejanus Plint's father is doing. And I could see it being a good bridge between what we see in Ballad and what we see of the careers in the Hunger Games. And what would it be like to read the POV of a character who is trained for their death, essentially, and is trained to accept that and rejoice in it in many ways and celebrate it, but then have to read them die and realize maybe in their last moments that this was all for nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that would be really heartbreaking and would allow us to explore the theme of propaganda and complicitness more fully than Haymitch's point of view would, I think.
I don't want to, I mean, I think to be clear, even if it's not Haymitch's point of view, if we focus too much on his character, I still think it's the prequel of that. But I do see your point. And honestly, I don't want to think about that too much because the story you just told is so good. I don't want to be disappointed if it's not that. But I think one of the biggest things I think that can maybe help the shift of thinking that I thought of as you were talking is that I think it's probably best to think of this not as a prequel to the Hunger Games, but as a sequel to Songbirds and Snakes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because I think you're right. This theme of propaganda is really started. One of the things that book is really about is about Cornelia Snow coming to understand and being one of the first people to really understand, other than the superiors who are working above him, that the Hunger Games is a propaganda tool.
Yeah.
Like he gets that. And so, you're right. Like this would be so interesting to see, like, what is happening with his theories 25 years later, 40 years later, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because the career districts weren't the career districts in Ballad.
Yeah.
They hated the capital just as much as the rest of the districts. They weren't trained for these games yet. But at some point, probably by the influence, with the help of Sejanus Plinth's own father, Sejanus rolling in his grave, they become what we know as the careers in the Hunger Games trilogy.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking.
Now, one thing I think that is important to say during this is, because you're thinking about casting and all that sort of thing, at least I am, the actor who played young Cornelia Snow was so good. You'd have to age him up fairly significantly to play this part, but I'd be interested to see him do it. What I think has to be mentioned is just a few days ago, we learned of the passing of Donald Sutherland, who was the amazing actor who played Cornelia Snow in the Hunger Games originals. Now, personally, I don't think de-aging technology is there that I think we could have had him play Snow in this, but certainly he would have been interesting, like as a voiceover or something like that. And I just, I don't often cry when I hear about the deaths of actors, because often it's like, it's someone who did stuff some time ago. Sutherland was obviously still creating stuff. He was such an important part of the Hunger Games. And so I just want to take a minute to really honor the incredible work he did with that. But to say, it would be like, I could see, I could see Snow being the point of view character, which I don't think is what I'd want, but could be very interesting. I could see the point of view character being another person from the districts. I could see it being someone who works for Snow, with Snow being a much small, and maybe, well, no, everything's already done. So I don't think what happened with Sutherland changes it at all. But yeah, there's just so many ways it could go. And I really love what has been done with the character of Snow in the books and in the movies with those two great actors. And yeah, like I hope he is a presence in this new story, even if he's mostly off screen, because it's kind of like, let's see all the things he learned in Ballads and Songbirds and Snakes, and how is that playing out now?
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see that. And I like what you said about viewing it more as a sequel to Ballad instead of a prequel to the trilogy, because that is very true. I think in many ways, we don't need it to tell us anything about the Hunger Games trilogy, but there is ample room to explore what was set up in Ballad.
Yeah, because I think, again, here's the prequel thing. I know that Haymitch was terribly traumatized. And I know a little bit of the details of that. He won the games in a way that was seen as disrespectful, and his family was killed soon after. And then that he has now spent the last 30 years having to watch the people he trains die year after year after year.
Yeah.
I don't think I need 2 hours of watching young Haymitch be traumatized so that I will better understand his character.
Yeah. And I don't think Suzanne Collins would do that.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of people would, like in a lot of stories, I think they would. But I think the fact that Suzanne didn't want to just give them that story, because that's probably what the studio wanted.
She put off for a long time. But this is what, like, fans have wanted this story for a really, really long time, and she's resisted.
Yeah. I think so.
That's why I have so much respect for her as a creator, really to really want to make sure that she is respecting her craft and her storytelling.
Yeah.
To this level is not something you see often.
It's probably also the only reason why I don't have more of a voice in my head saying, if your point was to help people realize how dangerous propaganda is, why didn't you write this? Why didn't this come out a couple months before November of this year? But again, respect for her, like the creative process is not easy and takes a long time. So
yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, Danielle, I always have the danger with you that our little like 5-minute bonus section is going to turn into a whole episode. But thank you so much. This has been wonderful. You will be on the day the book releases. How long should I give you to finish the book? 16 hours, 36 hours? Like when should we schedule the podcast for, 2 days after the book comes out, a week after the book comes out? What do you think?
Well, I finished Ballad in like a day and a half. So yeah, again, depending on how long it is, give me about 2 days and I should be good.
We'll do it in like the 36 to 56 hour window, somewhere in there. Thank you all so much to you members. You're what keeps the lights on. We really appreciate you. We have spoken.